if SB 240 goes, if these red flag laws are allowed to go as written, then government is going to decide who they think is capable of criminal activity. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Constitution Corner. Well, there are a lot of constitutionally relevant issues in the air today, including the impeachment of Donald Trump, all based on hearsay and he said, she said, the kind of stuff that would never make it in an actual court of law. A really interesting constitutional question. But I want to talk about something more immediate here. I want to talk about what's going on with regards to the Constitution in the state of Virginia. Virginia has recently passed a number of anti-gun legislation. In fact, they're considering one today that is really big. The Virginia Senate is considering SB 240, Senate Bill 240, which would permit guns to be confiscated in the state of Virginia from mentally ill owners of guns and for Virginians who are considered to be potentially able to engage in criminal acts. So they're going to decide not that you're not losing your guns if you're a criminal. You're losing your guns if there is a reasonable possibility that you might engage in criminal acts. And I want you to give you a real world example of how dangerous this is for our Constitution if this passes. And here's the thing. If the Democrat-controlled Senate passes this, then it goes to the Democratic-controlled House and then to the office of the Democrat governor. So once the Senate passes this, if they do, the odds of this going all the way are like 99%. So why is this so dangerous? Consider the Martin Luther King Day protests, pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment protests that descended upon the Virginia Capitol just this week. On Martin Luther King Day, lobbying day as they also know it in Virginia, various constituency groups come to the State House in Virginia and they lobby for particular political causes. This year's lobby day was overrun by conservative, responsible gun owners. These were people, and not just conservatives, there were liberals, there were women's groups, there were lesbian, gay, bisexual groups there, all to protest what the state was doing with regards to guns. And what's really interesting about this is that according to SB 240, according to SB 240, if it passes, what's going to happen is that you could have stopped this protest. Remember what the media was doing. Well before the protests on Monday, the media had painted the protesters as potentially violent, as potentially white supremacist, as potentially Klansmen, Ku Klux Klansmen. Before the first protester in Virginia got to the State House on Monday to protest, the governor had declared a state of emergency because in the governor's mind, these coming protesters were capable and probably able to commit crimes. Under SB 240, if it passes, the governor could have halted the protest and confiscated the guns of those protesters because in his mind, the government's mind, the governor's mind, this group who was simply supporting the Second Amendment were actually there to potentially commit crimes. I cannot understate this enough. If SB 240 goes, if these red flag laws are allowed to go as written, then government is going to decide who they think is capable of criminal activity. And you go back to the protests. There was not a single racist incident at these protests. There was not a single example of white supremacy at these protests. There were no Klansmen, no violence, no threatening of anybody. You didn't need Antifa riot gear cops. This went off without a hitch. These were responsible gun owners behaving responsibly, choosing the constitutional right to peacefully assemble and to protest and to lobby. They were doing nothing illegal, nothing wrong. In fact, you could just see how disappointed the media was. The media who beforehand called this a red flag situation. All these hicks from rural Virginia congregating in the State House, bringing guns to support pro-gun legislation, to support the Second Amendment. By definition, the media, national and international, the media local to Virginia, the D.C. media, the governor himself was projecting a narrative that these protests were, by definition, violence and violence waiting to happen. So if SB 240 had already been on the books, they could have justified arresting those protesters, stopping the protest legally stopping this right to protest and confiscated any guns that people brought to the march. This is a very, very serious situation. The meeting itself, the protesters themselves protesting in Virginia just this kind of legislation, they could have been the first sacrificial victims to this kind of government overreach. I'll tell you something else. The only person at that rally who had some visual tie to the Klan or to racism is Governor Northam himself. You remember his infamous picture from 20, 30 years ago in blackface with the little cone cap on, right? Here's the irony is that by his own argument, he perhaps might not have been able to be in Virginia at that time because somebody who dressed like a Klansman, that means that he has the capacity for crime. Maybe we ought to confiscate his bodyguards' guns. That would never happen. But maybe he needs to sit down with that other pajama boy up north, Justin Trudeau, who himself had blackface on, have a tea party, and maybe just maybe you leave responsible gun owners alone. Let the Second Amendment do its job. Honor the Constitution by understanding it. You can go to thenewamerican.com and jbs.org for more information.